Ashley, honey, it is such a pleasure to see you today. How are you, love?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Hmm. Well, I want to just get right into it. I want you to take me back to the moment that you first realized that you might be in perimenopause, because most of us, even when we're in it, we don't necessarily know we're in it. And when you kind of had an inkling that you were in peri, kind of what were you thinking or feeling at the time?
I realized I think my journey started honestly, it started much earlier, but when I really was in acute symptoms was 3 years ago. So I just turned 50. I had my beautiful IVF daughter at 46 years old. And with eggs I had frozen when I was in my late 30s. And then I was, in postpartum at 46 with her, so blissed out, dream come true, breastfeeding for 2 years. And it was about a year into, it was almost exactly a year after she was born. So I was 40, turning 47. And I woke up one day, I think it was actually even around her first birthday party, because I remember my mom was there. And I woke up with the most insane vertigo. And I never had vertigo. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't walk. We didn't know what was going on. I was crawling to the bathroom, and my husband took me to the emergency room, urgent care. And, they didn't know anything. It was just whatever. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, I wonder if this is hormonal related. And so I waited it out a couple days. And then one of my girlfriends, I knew she had had vertigo, and I started taking these salts, and that really helped balance me out. I still had lingering symptoms of that. It was really intense. And it's come back here and there much more subtly over the last couple of years. That was like my first big symptom. And pain during sex, all of a sudden overnight, one day I wake up and I have like intense pain during sex. And that for sure I knew was perimenopause. And but I still was in denial. And I think this is a pretty common thing where people, I didn't want to be in perimenopause. I was postpartum. I had a 1-year-old daughter. I was in the bliss and extreme challenge of new motherhood.
Yeah. So
And
yes, and
yeah, it's a yes, and that I'm really coining the term postpartum perimenopause, because there's so many of us in that subset that had children later, post 35, post 40, 45, and they're really converging. And so it's very hard to decouple and understand what's what. You just know you're in a hormonal chaos. But then I really started to I still didn't get my hormones checked. I still, everything kind of would go back to normal-ish for a minute. And then I started to experience real mental health problems. And I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been in the wellness industry for 25 years. This is my profession. And I was, again, I don't even think it was denial. I don't think I realized I was experiencing the level of not just mental health, but also cognition changes that I was. I was just kind of pinning it up to like, oh, again, postpartum, we just built a house, stress, post-COVID, my business has exploded, and I was running a big team and just feeling like, oh, I'm juggling all these balls. But what happened was where I had used to be able to juggle all those balls and really prided myself on that rushing woman syndrome. At this point, I just couldn't. And I remember coming down to my office and just sitting here spacing out and like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do today. Like literally sitting at my desk going, I don't know what to do. And I was in this sort of malaise, and then it deepened into, what I realized was actually depression. I finally went up, this is months later, went up to my husband and was like, I think I'm depressed. And he was like, you think? Yeah, you're totally depressed. And I was like, really? I didn't even recognize the symptoms. It was kind of this hopelessness, anhedonia, which means loss of joy, like a lack of joy in your life, where so many things in my life where my dream was coming true. And yet I was just apathetic, and I felt just no, enjoyment, not none, but, much less than normal. And I couldn't access not just joy, but a true loss of confidence, overthinking, lack of agency, like just thinking about going to a hormone doctor and then going to pick up my hormones at the pharmacy was completely overwhelming to me. And that was a huge red flag, because I'm like a type A overachiever. And like, I've just like managed all these balls in the air. And then real anxiety. Of course, the sleep came on, the sleep disruption, fragmented sleep, not being able to go to sleep. And again, for the first time, having ruminating thoughts, intrusive thoughts, that I have a lot of tools. This is what I teach. I teach mental health, meditation, mindfulness, mindset. And it was all I could do to just eke my way through it. And I realized this is really serious. Like, I really have to take this on. And so what I found was then when I started, I had gotten on hormones, I got with a holistic functional medicine doctor. We started doing all the tests, heavy metals, gut microbiome, everything else along with the hormones to just make sure nothing else was going on. And then I was endeavoring into my own study of menopause. And so what I found was there's, of course, this huge movement, which is amazing. Thank goodness in our generation. It also brought up a lot of rage for me that so many past generations of women were completely underserved, completely ignored, dismissed, gaslit. That's a whole other subject. But I realized that there wasn't, while people were saying, oh, depression and anxiety are symptoms of menopause, I got really curious with like, well, let's really unpack what's going on here. Because what I found was once I got on the hormones, that was extremely helpful and it totally saved my life. And I love them. And it didn't solve all my problems. Like, there's still a huge developmental phase that we're going through as women, people going through menopause, huge transitions in our sense of self, our ambition, our drive, who we are, identity, of course, sexuality. And that's a lot to manage on top of everything else that's happening in life. So I got really curious and basically pivoted my work to focus on the holistic journey of supporting women, especially in the mental, emotional, and spiritual transformation that we go through at this phase of life.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. One, thank you so much for sharing your story. I just want to celebrate you that having a beautiful little girl at 46 years old, like what a blessing. And then going from one hormone shift to another hormone shift, like totally destabilizing. And it absolutely shifts who we think we are, how we show up in the world. And so I'm just so grateful that you just really shared that story in such a beautiful way. And then as you are seeking out these answers and bringing on HRT, you brought up such a poignant point that a lot of us are thinking. And for some of us, it absolutely is true that you bring on the HRT and it fixes the things. It fixes all the things. And I have not found that to be 100% true myself.
Yeah.
I am on hormones and there are still hard days. There are still days where I'm climbing through like the mud just to get through the day. And you're absolutely right. It is a full body reckoning and it requires a lot of kind of introspection about what's important to us, how we prioritize the things that matter, and how do we step into the second phase. And so I really want to get more into that as well, because I can imagine you getting on HRT and kind of digging into the root causes of what is going on, really with the hope that you are going to feel a lot different, like significantly different.
Yeah.
And then you come on the other side and you're like, I don't feel as different as I thought I would.
Yeah, what I would say is I look at it like coming from the psychological world of mental health, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I really look at it as the menopausal hierarchy of needs. And, for me, sleep is number one. Like if you're not sleeping well, it's very hard to function. It's very hard to have any semblance of strong mental health, emotional, physical health. So that's number one, is tackling your sleep. And then number two is the physiology of, finding your care team, deciding what your plan is going to be with your hormones, whether you're pursuing HRT or not, but really getting the supports in fitness, nutrition, whether it's intermittent fasting, of course, sleep, lifestyle. There's a lot of lifestyle changes that are needed. And those aren't necessarily easy to make. At least for me, it wasn't. Like, some of them are and some of them aren't. But tackling, the sort of basics, the biology first, if we're talking biopsychosocial. And then once you get that kind of handled, and I say this because it's a lot to take on all at once. Many of us, we're living in the sandwich generation. Many of us have children and maybe aging parents. We're probably at the peak of our career, so we're handling a lot in that sense. Whatever your relationship situation is, there's so many things pulling us. And so I like to kind of frame it as there is a hierarchy of needs. Start here, go there. Once you kind of get some stabilizing, again, in your physiology and your hormone balance, then start to look into well, what's actually going on under the surface, right? Because it's not easy aging in an ageist culture. For women who have been objectified our whole lives, or like me, really identified with my sexuality and femininity and beauty. And that was it's a huge part of who I am, huge part of my life. So to feel that shifting, especially when sex drive drops, and, that's a huge piece to unpack and really explore one's sexuality. And that played a huge role in my mental health as well, because I was experiencing so much grief around this loss of sex drive. Even though I love my partner, I find him incredibly attractive, so that really played into my mental health. But then also, again, this phase of life and getting the support that I needed to look at my own internalized patriarchy and my internalized ageism, and how critical I was being on myself, not just for physical looks and beauty externally, that kind of external validation, but then also really making peace with where I am at this crossroads in my life, this phase of life. And most of us at this age, certain things have not turned out the way we expected or we thought. Maybe we're in a marriage that we don't want to stay in, or a relationship is not quite the way we thought, or the children, that we have are experiencing problems, or we had achievements that we didn't realize in our career, health crises, opportunities, whatever those things are, it's a huge reckoning. And so there's a lot that can come up at this phase of life psychologically, and we need to be extremely generous and gentle with ourselves. And in my experience, really doubling down on those lifestyle choices and habits and self-care practices just has become a non-negotiable. I can't even, I'm not going to thrive in my life where I used to be able to get away with a lot of stuff and have a really strong, healthy constitution, thank goodness. And now I can't.
Yeah, I think that is I want to speak into that. I'd love for you to just kind of share your own personal experience. But yeah, I mean, I think for a while, a lot of us, especially the high achieving women, we kind of got away with some things. Like I could get away with only 5 or 6 hours of sleep, or I could get away really burning the candle at both ends, or, just kind of running at like bullet train speed until all of a sudden, no. I was talking to another expert today, and we were talking about how we used to just run into bed and fall asleep. Like, do you remember being able to just run to bed? And like, you can't do that anymore. You gotta warm up the system. You gotta kind of like wine and dine the body to convince it to want to go to sleep, have that beautiful sleep routine. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what did that transformation feel like of realizing, oh, like I got to be a lot more intentional about what I'm doing. I don't get to cut corners anymore.
Yeah, it's been, of course, it's two sides of the same coin, where on the one hand, experiencing such acute symptoms, and especially for me, I definitely did have physical symptoms, but I would say primarily they were mental, emotional. It gave me such a huge window into what so many people experience in life with mental health challenges that I hadn't had a lived experience of before. So much more compassion and understanding for depression, for anxiety, for real insecurity, and this plays into the role of testosterone. When our testosterone drops, there were so many other factors involved, of course, when your body's changing or you're having more weight around the middle that you have to, manage and deal with, or sex drive. Those do really affect our mental health. And then it puts a strain on the relationship. And then, if you're not showing up in the same way, all of these factors are playing into it. And for example, when testosterone drops, I really noticed, my sense of agency, my loss of confidence. I mean, it was like overnight, I was overthinking just putting up a post on social media. Like I couldn't even get it up because I was so in my head about it. And I just kept saying to Aaron, like, I don't recognize my brain. Like, I don't recognize myself. This is not who I am. This is not how I act. Like I always had a sense of confidence, and so that was a real turning point. But for me, the compassion of what people go through, and then really having to double down on the practices that I know work. And so, of course, yoga, meditation are a huge part of that for me, really having to work with my mind in a different way than I had ever had to before. Definitely sleep. So I was grateful that it had given me so much insight, and I really had much more of that lived experience to draw from as a clinician. But then also the shadow side of it is the rebel in me, the sort of, I was pissed off. It added to my sacred rage and anger about this whole process. Like, why is it that women are going through all of this? Like, we go through being in charge of our birth control and then trying not to get pregnant and then protecting ourselves sexually and then trying to get pregnant and then having a pregnancy and then childbirth, which is so intense. Breastfeeding was a traumatic experience for me, and I'm just like, and men don't seem to. So like these voices in my head were really strong of like, this isn't fair. And so I really had to work with my anger, my rage, my emotional processing. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the collective sort of rage that I had about the patriarchy, misogyny, women that have been completely underserved in the medical industry among every other industry. So I had to really process this. And in my membership, one of the things that we do every month on the full moon is we have an emotional processing anger work session, because I want to give people, primarily women, a really clear container to move that energy through. And we have to find ways to get that emotion and energy out of our bodies, or else, of course, it becomes toxic. So that shadow side was a huge piece of it too, of like, I don't want to have to be so on point with all my calories or nutrients or, tracking everything in my fitness and data. And like, that's not my tendency. And so I really had to work with that rebel in me, that kind of rebellious teenager that was like, fuck this, I don't want to do this. And just be like, this is essentially what anyone that's really prioritizing their health, that's working with a chronic health issue, this is just and reframe it as the opportunity to really up-level my vitality, my service, my commitment, and see how that's serving me in every way in my life, right? But it hasn't been easy.
No. I mean, I so deeply appreciate you sharing what a gift to understand what so many of your patients have gone through, right? Your clients have gone through in their healing mental health issues. Cause to finally fully know what it feels like. Taking care of women in midlife for 17 years, and I still felt blindsided by perimenopause, because until it happens to you, like as much as I had taken care of so many women, like I just didn't know. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. Like, oh my goodness, like this is a lot. And yeah, I hear you in terms of the rebel side or the this is not fair side, especially with the healthcare system built the way it is. There's still a massive knowledge gap, as you know, Ashley. A lot of women, it's taking 4 to 6 appointments for doctors to connect the dots between what they're going through and it being perimenopause and menopause. And what that does is it delays care. It delays treatment, and it delays a woman's quality of life. And should we feel a bit outraged by that? Absolutely. Should we want and deserve a higher standard of care? Absolutely. And should we be a little mad, a little upset for having to be so freaking intentional about everything now? Sleep, movement, blood sugar regulation, what we eat, mental well-being, stress reduction. I mean, the list, sleep optimization. You're like, wait, did you not know I had all this other stuff to do?
Yeah.
Like, including kids and career and all the things. And now I got to do, and now you're just more on my plate. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Is that what I get? And so, I can imagine it being, there are definitely days where I'm just like, oh, and there's also for me, and I'm curious to talk to you about it, is a surrender. Like, I'm like, okay, this is, if I imagine my future self 30, 40 years down the line, and I want freedom and agency, and I want joy, and I really want to do things on my terms. I don't want people helping me to get up off a toilet or a seat or whatever. And I imagine her just kicking butt and taking names. I'm like, okay, what does it look like for me on the daily to become her?
Yeah, I run a 6-week menopause. I have a 6-month mentorship, but right now we're doing a 6-week kind of condensed version. And we just did a transmission with the wise woman. I bring in a lot of archetypes and, the spiritual, psycho-spiritual support. And so connecting to that inner wise woman and imagining myself at 80, 85, like, who is that woman and what is she teaching me? And what is she asking of me? Like, how do I need to show up now to be in service to that woman? And I think what we're going through is it's a real cultural shift. It's evolution, right? Every generation evolves. That's the nature. That's nature. That's the nature of any species. We evolve. We become a little bit more advanced and sophisticated and refined every generation. And so I think what we're seeing is sort of where we were back maybe in the late 70s, 80s, where all of a sudden we realized, oh, we do need to be working out. We should put fitness, on the map. And then we got, maybe in the 80s and 90s, a little more with nutrition. And then in the 2000s, like really understanding both the detoxing and the environmental chemicals, but also nutrients and superfoods and all of these, so we've been in a huge shift over the last 30, 40 years. And now what I think we're realizing is the next level. Like if I think our generation, as we go into our elder years, really understanding what it's going to take to have vitality and health span in a different way than our culture has ever been conditioned before. And so we are on that event horizon, and it is a shapeshift culturally. And I feel so grateful to be alive at this time, and especially in the wellness industry when there's so much innovation. It's such an exciting time. That's the reframe of out with the old and in with the new. Like this is what it looks like to be mindful and conscious and really prioritizing health span.
Mm. And so kind of imagining your kind of wisdom self at 85 or 84 years old, did you feel that shift really happen for you too? Because I feel like we can really get stuck in this is happening to me. In a lot of ways, it is happening to you.
It's good to not spiritually bypass and not like just sugarcoat the scenario because it is intense.
Yeah.
And it's a both and, right?
Yeah, right. I'm like, it's happening without permission. Like nobody is signing up for this. No one's like, I will take hormone disruption at the time of my life where I'm holding it all together. And then we also, we get into feeling empowered. And I think that it's not an everyday. There are definitely days, Ashley, where I feel super empowered and I'm like, okay, I got this. I got this. Like I am my own hype man over here, just trying to convince myself that I can just do another day. And then other days where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this day.
No. And I think I honestly, of course, as a licensed psychotherapist, one of the things I do think is important, not to get stuck in the story, but it is important to tell our stories. That's why I'm so grateful that you're breaking open this platform, because we need to hear each other's stories. The biggest thing I felt 3 years ago when I was in my acute suffering, and even 2 years ago, was alone. And I felt isolated because most of my mom friends are 10 years younger than me. My sisters, some of my good friends maybe weren't experiencing the same level of symptoms. And I was just like, and then I'm in the wellness industry. So you kind of have that, there is a shadow of like the wellness shame of like, oh my God, I'm not doing this entire protocol. What's wrong with me that I have all these symptoms? And feeling like putting on a CGM and doing keto and doing intermittent fasting and up leveling my protein. Is it protein or is it keto? Just feeling so overwhelmed. I felt ashamed. I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in this industry, but I can't, it's too much for me. And so I think there's telling the stories and sharing really authentically and vulnerably and transparently is such an important piece of this, because we heal together. We are changing culture. We are weaving a new sisterhood, a new ethos. We also have to educate our partners, our children, our work environments, and really shift the culture. That's the moment that we're in right now.
No, I agree with you. I think about, this perimenopause revolution, right? What we're talking about here, it is a revolution. And a big part, I dedicated a whole chapter to community and why women are feeling so isolated during this time, that the narrative has always been to blame us, that we blame ourselves, or the narrative is that we should feel ashamed of the symptoms, that we're broken and that we did this to ourselves. And it's so far from the truth. And so in this time, I'm curious, as you noticed feeling lonely and feeling ashamed and kind of realizing, oh man, like I'm kind of surrounded by women a lot younger, or women are not really experiencing this as I did. Oh, what did you shift? How were you able to cultivate more community for yourself, Ashley?
Well, I mean, one of the things that really helped was getting more involved in the menopause movement and seeing these leaders and being like, okay, there is this menopause, there is this amazing group of women. And that's so inspiring, right? Because we want to look at those people that are expanders take inspiration and move towards that and activate that part within ourselves. And then the other piece, which I think is a really important, it's a huge piece of my work that I do with my clients and a huge piece of healing is, turning our pain into purpose and turning our wounds into wisdom and really saying, wow, this is what I've been going through. This has been really challenging. I'm going to share and offer so I can help people. And so I can help be a way shower and be a comrade in arms, with other women that are going through this. So in my community, with my private clients, telling these stories, connecting with colleagues like yourself and just feeling like we're in this together. And that's a superpower of women. Women have that horizontal, multifaceted capacity. Our relational skills are our superpower. And that is how I truly believe that bringing feminine power into right relationship with masculine. It's not power over, it's not one or the other, it's the yin and yang, but the need to rebalance feminine and masculine power and feminine and masculine wisdom is is the only thing I believe that will save this planet. And I really say that unequivocally, that I believe elder women in midlife and beyond are the greatest resource on the planet. The wisdom that women carry and people with wombs in our embodied lived experience to then channel that into leadership. And that's why I'm now becoming really passionate about feminine leadership, and especially in menopause and beyond, because we need to use our voices. We need to find how to channel it in order to change culture. We need to change the dynamics in relationships, unpaid labor, mental load, all of these, things. And then, of course, the medical system, educational system. These are huge, huge tectonic shifts in culture, but it's happening. The time is now. I see what's happening in the menopause space is very much what happened in sort of the postpartum space, and understanding that, oh, there is postpartum depression. Oh, there is a massive hormonal shift and a complete remodeling of a woman's body, mind, and psyche and emotional life after she has a baby. And that was maybe 20, 30 years ago that really happened, when Tom Cruise was like saying there's no such thing as postpartum depression, and Brooke Shields and that. I think that's where we are now with menopause. Like 20 years later, it's like, oh, this is actually a real thing. And we need to take it on. There's been such little medical research done. We know that, medical bias. And we're demanding change, and we need to demand change. And so channeling that, the challenge or the pain into purpose and really taking a stand is what creates healing and creates meaning from it, right?
I love that. As I'm listening to you, I feel like you have become so crystal clear. If perimenopause has been a great teacher of yours, what has been some of the biggest lessons in that for you, and that you want to carry forth to everyone, any woman listening, but also in your community and within your friend group, like you said, turning pain into purpose?
I love that question so much. And I will say that menopause, I think, actually has probably been my greatest teacher, and I've said that a lot in the work that I've been doing, beyond a decade-long, fertility journey, beyond walking my father through his death with cancer. I really feel like the dark night of the soul that I was in for the last 2 to 3 years, it's been the most challenging time in my life, hands down. I was for many months like barely functional, aside from like I could be a good mother. I was doing that well, but my business was really struggling. My relationship was really struggling. It's been the biggest reckoning that I've experienced, and traumatic experience, actually. And not to, be dramatic about it, but I think it's important to name it what it is. And that is part of the teaching that I've had, is like a real resurgence and a reawakening within me. My work has always been about serving women. I used to run a priestess mystery school. I work 99% of my clients are women, and really endeavoring to support women's empowerment and finding their voice and taking action and really embracing and celebrating the feminine. And it's been a resurgence in my passion for that, and a call to me to come out in my voice even more and like not hold back. I realized how I've kind of been playing it safe or playing it small. And I'm like, no more. There is no more time for this. I am here to support women doing the healing work that they need to be. A lot of trauma comes up in menopause. I do want to name that, because we're in that hormonal zone of chaos. It's a window of risk. We don't have the buffer. We don't have the ground that, I'm speaking also for myself, but collectively, when estrogen and progesterone and testosterone drop, and I felt like the bottom literally fell out, where I would have been able to hold things, hold big stressors in my life, and all of a sudden, much smaller things were taking me down. And so when we don't have that hormonal buffer where we had been able to kind of manage things or get through, the good news is it forces you to face those things. The challenges, it can be very challenging, but the opportunity is for us to wake up and really take action in an even bigger way. And so there can be, for many women, trauma can resurface, or things that we thought we had dealt with, core wounds that we thought we had, sort of managed or healed, can come up and rear their head again. That was my experience. So I just want to name that as a side note, because trauma can be a really big piece for many women going through menopause. But yeah, I think the lesson for me is this reawakening of like, I am here to support women in this. We need to find our voices. We need to find our power in the sense of like really taking action, speaking truth to power, whatever way that looks like in your own life, and embracing feminine energy and embracing cyclical living, cycle syncing, trusting in the feminine, the ebb and flow. Our whole culture is built in a very patriarchal, masculine, consistent, all of these models that we don't even realize we're living in. We don't even question the questions that we're asking. And in order, our psychology is not separate than our culture, right? So we need to change culture and bring in and infuse more femininity, by which I mean yin, essence, all of these, ways of being that we are in denial of, because this is part of our shame. This is what's at the root of our shame complex with women, is that our culture doesn't value feminine ideals. And so we need to place that back at the center. We need to recenter feminine aspects, feminine power. There's so many different myriad ways that we do that, but really giving women permission to be, whether it's deep rest, radical rest, nervous system regulation, emotional processing, intuition, again, cyclical living, ebbing and flowing. We need to reorder in our culture. And it's a big task, but there's ways that we can each do it little by little in our lives to start to create that ripple effect.
Yeah, I want to have you speak into how you are implementing that for yourself, because I do feel it's a moment, like you talked about, a reckoning, but it's also a time for us to become discerning, especially if we don't have a lot of bandwidth, the type of bandwidth that we used to have, and we're not willing to tolerate the things that we used to tolerate because we don't have space for it anymore. And so I know for every woman, boundaries come up, relationships are coming up for review. Obviously, health, partnership is coming up for review, and prioritizing ourselves, letting go. I know so many women come into perimenopause and midlife realizing that they've been living someone else's life the whole time, that they've been living someone else's beliefs the entire time. So I'm curious, one, are these some of the big ones that we're shifting? And then what has shifted for you?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, you just named a lot of them. I think the dynamic in relationships is really important, and understanding boundaries and workload and priorities. Again, honoring and acknowledging. And this can be something that's really challenging. If you're, for example, myself, my partner is amazing and he has a lot of, spiritual depth and psychological development, but he's a super alpha male. And so for him to really understand this ebb and flow, this unpredictability or wild nature of the feminine, even if it's just the hormonal chaos, and then how that, creates all these other effects, it's really hard. And so it's been a real opportunity, to educate him and to try to, bring him on board. And he's extremely understanding in a lot of ways. And in other ways, he's just like, what is going on? Like, I don't get it. You used to, so this is a real life example, right? You were managing all this in your career, like you were making all this money, and it really dipped over the last, couple years because I didn't have the capacity. I was like, I have to just streamline everything, slow it down for a little bit, pull it in, reorganize in the sense of reprioritizing, like what is and again, to speak to your point, what is the career and the business model that fits for me? because I can look at other colleagues and dear friends that we know, and I'm like, wow, I get so envious or jealous, or I want to do that. And then I'm like, no, I actually did that. I built a big team. I had a big business, and it feels like too much for me right now. I want to slow it down. I want to get back to working with some private clients and doing psychedelic therapy and things that aren't as scalable, right? Because that's that masculine drive and push to profit only, numbers only, unsustainable, or what's scalable, prioritizing and overvaluing, over indexing on what's scalable, instead of really getting with myself and asking what's authentic to me. What am I here to do right now? It might change in 2 years. And so that's an example. Reprioritizing and really tuning in. That's a tool that I would give to everyone, is like tuning in, seek your own counsel first. And many of us, as you said, are so far away from what our truth is or our own authenticity. It can take a lot of time. And you probably, I would encourage you to get support, whether it's a coach or a therapist or someone that can help you to really do that inner work and start shedding the expectations or the persona, all of these ways that we built ourselves up. And what is called for at menopause is this clarification. It is a realignment. One of my teachers, Alexandra Pope, who runs the Red School, says that menopause is the great awakening. It is the great awakening of a whole other level of consciousness and a whole other level of power. But anytime we go through an initiation, it requires something of us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to require us to put some things down. So like I said, I really streamlined my business. When I thought it was streamlined, I kept having to streamline it even more. And it was painful. I'm like, I don't want to really let this go. But I saw how deeply ingrained my conditioning was to hustle and push and even focus on building, instead of just being content with what I had and being really content in pouring into and thriving in what felt really aligned for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so the ego, I think what we're up against partially in menopause is our ego and our persona and what we've been conditioned to pursue and build ourselves up into. And then menopause hits, maybe our capacity or our desires shift. And it's a conversation between the ego and the soul, and coming back to the authenticity of what is really aligned for me, what creates peace and joy. Pleasure is our superpower as all people, but definitely women. And so tuning into your pleasure, what brings you deep, lasting joy and pleasure. For me, it's deep relational connections with people, a lot more time in real life than I was doing before. Creating micro communities. That's what we do in my Haven membership, of really feeling like you have a support, a place where you're seen, you're known, you're held. And, people like you and our colleagues to just spend time together. So it's going to look different for everyone, but that tuning in, seeking your own counsel, that's been a huge learning for me. And then trusting, your way is not going to look like anyone else's way. That's the magic, right? But it takes a real discipline to pursue that, because we're so conditioned to compare as women and look outside of ourselves for validation. So it's a deep skill that we're building to strengthen the discipline of discernment and the boundaries within our own selves. And often the boundaries with ourselves is the hardest thing to implement.
I think you touched upon some really big aspects of transformation, of awakening, and of getting really crystal clear about what is serving us and what isn't. I loved the question of what brings me deep joy, and getting clear on that. Or, a question that I love to ask myself, and I ask a lot of my patients, is what would you love?
Yeah.
What is a full body yes?
Yeah.
And what is a full body no?
Yeah.
And trusting your intuition to have that answer, and then actually executing on that.
Yeah.
I think that those are, it's a lot of deep questioning.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot of deep questioning. And that's why I do go back to the menopause hierarchy of needs, because unless you kind of have, sleep and some physiology, hormonal balance, you have a plan, you're stabilized, it's pretty difficult to start deepening into the more psycho-spiritual journey, which I think is just as important. And it's a natural phase of development, which I really want to emphasize. And the good way to think about menopause is it's the bookend to puberty. So
Yeah.
puberty, when we start our menses, is our introduction into womanhood. And of course, the fertile years, which are, say those 30, 40 years where we're in our fertility. So imagine that girl from 9 years old to 14. Like my niece is 14 now. And so she's just gone through that in the middle, but going through that transition. And who she was as a 9 or 10-year-old girl is completely different. She's gone through an entire metamorphosis reincarnation into being this young woman, right? And we recognize in puberty that it's a natural phase. It's a years-long journey.
Yeah. It's like
You know,
8 years, give or take. Like
yeah,
for the brain to even be kind of developed into
exactly.
womanhood, I would say even girls at 16 years old are still
Of course.
working it out,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the psychology we recognize is totally different. They
Mhm.
are relating to life, processing the world in an entirely different way. So menopause is the other side of that. It's the yin and yang. It's the flip side of the coin. And so we're also going through this huge, my program's called Metamorphosis, because we really are going through a huge metamorphosis, remodeling, of course, hormonally, but then that's neurological, that's every system of the body. And what I'm so passionate about is that it's our psyche too. We're going through a huge metamorphosis and change. The third aspect of that is becoming a mother and matrescence. And so maybe you became a literal mother with a child or creative mother. But when you go into that journey of motherhood, you have at least 9 months, 12 months essentially of the pregnancy, all the way through that gestation, birth, then the postpartum, then the breastfeeding, so it's the first couple of years at least
Mhm.
of moving into motherhood where we also recognize there's a huge shift in a woman's entire being and the way she relates to life and her priorities. And this is also happening at menopause. So we need to really open it up. This is not just a biological and hormonal event. This is happening. We're multidimensional beings and it's happening on every level. So that's psycho-spiritual journey, but it's hard to really do that kind of inner work until you get the physiology at least somewhat stabilized.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. It's hard to kind of imagine yourself or getting clear on what desires and what drives you and what excites you when you are barely crawling through mud.
Yeah.
You're just, when you're surviving, you're surviving. So yeah, I absolutely agree. And no woman should just be surviving in this journey. They should be thriving. And this is why I wanted to have these higher level conversations to not only talk about what you've been through, Ashley, but what have been the lessons, the beautiful lessons that you were not only, moving through now, but you're still uncovering. I think about perimenopause and this beautiful metamorphosis also as a superpower because it is a beautiful opportunity. So I'd love for you to share kind of the strength or the insight that you have gained that you would have not discovered otherwise.
I mean, I think that the biggest thing, and it's one that I, of course, still struggle with, but is self-compassion and really having so much compassion for this human experience and having a body that's constantly changing. And then you are launched into this entire upheaval that, again, like you said, no one asked for. And then trying to adult in the world and just make, sense of it all when we're living in a really intense environment right now. We can't, it's all interrelated. And then perhaps being a parent or pursuing your dharma, your purpose, it's a lot. And so I do think that simplifying and the spiritual tenets of simplifying, staying really grateful, again, one of the bigger shadows for me that's come up at this phase has been this recognizing this conditioning to pursue and achieve and compete and like compare myself to other people. And I've really had to continue. It's been a massive unwinding of like seeking the peace within myself. When we get to midlife, we're facing mortality. We've all known people that have died prematurely or unexpectedly. We've all had some great losses and initiations in our life. And it's very humbling. And so part of the wisdom that comes with age, hopefully, is humility, compassion, being more generous with ourselves, being more generous with each other. And so those are really important aspects of self. Carl Jung has had a huge awakening at midlife, and he has what he called the 7 rites of midlife, like the 7 passages that we go through. And part of it is when we get to midlife, we often tip from being more ego driven in the first half of our life, which is totally normal. And yoga has a whole system that relates to this too. It's called the 4 ashramas, the 4 phases of life. And so up until midlife, we're focused on building that ego sense of self. Ego's not bad. We all have an individual sense of self that we need to develop, pursuing that in the outer world, building our family, building our career. And then we kind of reach this tipping point, and menopause is that midlife, is that reckoning. And now we are facing death. We realize time goes fast. We realize nothing is guaranteed. We've had great loss. And so it helps put things in perspective. And it hopefully helps us prioritize things more. And the idea is that at midlife, we turn from being so ego-driven to being more altruistic and really wanting to be in service to humanity, to life in all forms, and use the rest of our life to advocate for ourselves and for others and for the benefit of all beings. And so there's this spiritual, hopefully, like a spiritual awakening of just, what is life really about? It goes fast. And so again, these are very big questions. They can feel overwhelming. Everyone's not going to go on that journey. But that, I think, is the existential crisis that many of us are facing, knowingly or unknowingly, when we're hitting this midlife point.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I love that you're out there really not only taking ownership in your own journey, but really stepping up to the plate to help support women in a beautiful way. Ashley, honey, where can we get more of you? What I've loved so much is the beautiful communities that you're curating, and that you really are not only walking the walk, but showing other women how to do it too.
Thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure. I have my Haven community, which is an online membership. And we have a new moon, as I said. We have a new moon restorative practice really meant to support that cyclical living. So new moon restorative, quieting down, full moon activation, that emotional processing, anger work. Then, of course, it's a huge library of yoga and meditation classes. And we also align with the Wheel of the Year. So again, really embedding different natural, just experiences and events, and for us to come together and have it built into your life. So the equinox, the solstice, we have rituals for those. And then there's support groups inside of our app. So cancer, LGBTQ+, parenting, other support groups. It's really meant to be a hub for holistic mental health and a support system, and really reinstalling these micro communities that we need to feel a part of. Many of us are not going to church in the same way. This is like therapy, church, and kick-ass workout all in one. And then I have my menopause 6-week course. It's called Metamorphosis. And then I work with private clients and do psychedelic therapy and psychedelic retreats with women primarily. So those are my core offerings right now.
I love it. Oh, thank you, honey, so much for coming on. Thank you for being a part of this beautiful perimenopause revolution and sharing your story. I just am so deeply grateful for you to be here with me today.
I am so grateful for you, Mariza. Everything you're doing is so powerful. Thank you all for tuning in. And I'm so excited for this book. What a blessing for all of us.
Thank you, honey. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Now, if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you are ready to learn more about perimenopause and how to navigate with a lot of ease and grace, be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can join our community. Don't forget to share this video with someone that you love, that you know is navigating the perimenopause journey as well, because they deserve to feel their best too. See you in the next video.